Hey, I want to thank our two sponsors for this show, Armored Coffee up in Indiana, and Randy LeBear and his team. He is the owner and operator of a great faith based company who makes great coffee. He's just a good guy, and I want to thank him for supporting this show. Secondly, and most recently, we've had a new addition to the coffee family in Conroe, Texas, and would like to welcome Angie and her team from Summer Moon Coffee Conroe. Thank you for your support of Last in Line leadership and this show, this podcast. And I want to encourage you, if you live in the Houston area, come up to Conroe, South Loop 336, Summer Moon Coffee. They've got some ridiculous choices and some really tasty treats for the coffee enthusiast. And even if you're not a coffee drinker, this environment and this atmosphere they've created is just welcoming. It's just a warm, friendly environment. It's fun to come in and just relax. The team is just great in customer service. So I wanted to give them a shout out and thank them for their support. So come up and see them here in Conroe, Summer Moon Coffee. So, guys, I've got three words for you today: protect, provide, preside. These three words I'm going to tell you are the mantra, the motto, the code, really the tagline and the vision that became a reality for our guest today. So I have the pleasure of having Ryan Michler from the Order of Man podcast with us today, guys. He has built this platform, this movement. He's been a part of something bigger than himself. And I've just watched it, just over a short time, but over 6 years, he's built this. And he's got what's called the Iron Council Brotherhood, where it's about discipleship. It's about just accountability and just iron sharpening iron. And then he's an author of a book called Sovereignty, and it is the battle for the hearts and minds of men. He has over, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, followers. He's got so much reach, and his audiences are impacted. And I just want to welcome him to the show formally. Ryan Michler, welcome, brother.
What's up, man? Glad to join you today. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, me too. This is not something that comes along every day when a guy's as busy as you, man. You've got, a list probably as long as your arm of things to do. So, man, my audience I'm going to thank you on their behalf. Let's just put it this way. I'll put words in their mouth. So,
That's
man, thanks
good.
for being a part
But
of
frankly,
it.
I really don't know if I'm any busier than anybody else. We're all busy. We all got things to do. We're running around doing different things, but I don't consider myself busier or more important or anything like that than what
Sure.
anybody who might be listening has to do. So yeah,
Yeah, no,
we're
and
all
that's
in
what
that
I
boat.
get. I mean, that's what I get from your message and the voice you have. I mean, I get that. It doesn't get much more authentic and real. And I encourage people, and I've been sharing the podcast, and I really am encouraging just my sphere of influence to just get out there and get some of your materials, because they will see that come out in you. And I appreciate the transparency and authenticity.
Yeah, thanks,
Man,
man.
so I want to read a quote of yours. You ever had somebody quote yourself back to you? In a good
I've had
way.
that a couple of times. I'm like, I don't know.
In a good
Usually
way.
it's a bad thing because usually what guys will do is they'll come back and they'll say, well,
Yeah.
3 years ago you said dot, dot, dot. I'm like, well,
Yep.
yeah, that was 3 years ago. I've changed a little bit over 3 years. So
Absolutely.
hopefully it's a
Absolutely.
good quote. We'll see what you have to say.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's going to lead us in to our discussion here in a minute. And the audience knows this series has been called Conquer Your Enemy, the NME, Narrative Masculinity Elevation. But your quote is, guys, talking to men, we're losing the meaning of manhood. We've gone away from being strong, rugged, independent, and tough to a collection of wimpy, dependent whiners. Something has got to be done. And I think you only used one exclamation point there when you could have really used three or four. But talk about that statement and really the context behind it and what drove you to start Order of Man.
Yeah, I see what happens, and it's increasingly happening within modern culture and society where we're attempting to redefine what masculinity is. This is verbatim what people will say. We need to redefine masculinity. And I don't find that to be true. If anything, we need to reestablish masculinity and manliness and rugged individualism and the ability to, like you said earlier, protect, provide, preside. And it's nice, we live in this relative ease of modernity, which we don't have to worry about too much. I know we're in the wake of this reaction to COVID, and people are struggling economically, and they might have health issues that they're dealing with. But outside of that, we live in a pretty comfortable environment. Most people's worst day is when somebody cuts them off on the road, or some 16-year-old kid gets their order wrong at McDonald's or Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have these challenges like we may have had 100 years ago. And then when they do present themselves, you get laid off, you deal with a medical condition, going through a separation or a divorce, you lose a big client or contract. Then I've seen grown men crumble at the slightest sign of adversity. And this is because of this idea, this concept that has been introduced in this, again, ease of modernity, which says that we don't need to be rugged. We don't need to be tough. We don't need to present challenges to ourselves voluntarily. And people end up really getting themselves in a difficult situation. Not to mention the mental health issues that comes with living this kind of life.
Yeah.
If you're just sitting your butt on the couch all day, every day, you're watching porn, you're eating a bunch of junk food, you're drinking alcohol, you don't have any sort of meaning or fulfillment or purpose or direction in your life. I mean, it's not any wonder to me that we see the suicide rates with men are up to
Yeah.
4 to 5 times as high as they are for women. So we're struggling. And what modern culture will say about this struggle is that, well, you're struggling because of these outdated concepts of masculinity. No, that's not why we're struggling. We're struggling because we're not embracing those traditional concepts of masculinity,
Yeah.
and instead buying into the bull crap that says that we need to be more feminine, that we don't need to be these warrior type archetypes. And it's hurting a lot of
Yeah.
men and the people that they're attempting to serve, our families, friends, colleagues, coworkers, clients, employers, employees, etc.
Right.
It's
Right.
rough, really
Perfect. Yeah.
rough.
No, I hear you. And we're going to unpack that a little more down the road in this talk, because I know we've got some layers to this, and I want to pick your brain for sure. But so to give the audience context or a little bit of idea, just you moved from your Utah to Maine, right? 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah,
about
a
right?
little over 2
And
years ago.
you've been doing this podcast for about 6 years. So man, as this thing's kind of just blown up, and obviously the need was there, and you've met a need, and you've done it in a way that really has been practical for guys to latch onto. It's been impactful for them to really put legs on in their own lives. What's it meant to really be a part of something like that and to start something like that, and the growth that you've seen over 6 years is just, I mean, it's crazy. So what's that really kind of meant to you, your family? Like, what are you sitting back going, wow, we created this?
Right. I mean, it's pretty humbling and inspiring. I'm honored that so many men and women listen to what we're doing, that are inspired. I get messages without a doubt every single day from people who have salvaged their marriages, or they just launched a business, or they're starting a podcast, or they lost 50 pounds, or they went and did their first marathon, or whatever their thing is. And I'm just humbled by it. I really didn't start this movement. It wasn't even a movement when I started it. I just wanted to have great conversations with men I was personally inspired by. So I had another podcast prior to the Order of Man podcast, and was all dedicated to helping people with their money, because I'm a previous former financial advisor. So I was doing the podcast, but realized very quickly I love the medium of podcasting, but didn't want to continue to have that same conversation that I'd been having, forever, for 10 years almost at that point. So pivoted, switched gears. And from day one, this thing just took off, which is not a testament necessarily to me or what I'm doing, as much as it is that men were starving for this information and the tools and resources that myself and our guests have provided. So we've done some things right over the past 6 years. And again, I mean, I can put my head on my pillow every night and just be completely satisfied and fulfilled with the work that we're doing. And not to mention, my kids get to see me engaged in this and get to participate to varying degrees in what we're
Yeah.
doing. In fact, just before we jumped on this podcast, my two oldest sons and I were working down in our merchandise store, which is also in our house, fulfilling orders, and they're learning the business side and the customer
Mhm.
service side. And so, and in fact, my youngest, my 5-year-old, was helping me put labels, packing labels on packages and boxes. So everybody's involved in this thing, and
Yeah.
what a cool opportunity.
Yeah, it's bought. They're bought in and they're invested because they see that you've made it about something bigger than yourself. But then you've wrapped, got them involved. That's awesome. I mean, that's a vision of what a lot of men are probably getting to or wanting to get to at some point. So, anything kind of surprise you about this journey that you didn't see come, like about yourself, even? Like, so let's get real personal if we can. What surprised you about yourself? Because there's fear attached to branching out on your own in something like this. Will they like it? Will it resonate? Will I be successful? Like, did you anything surprise you about yourself and kind of the journey to this point?
I wasn't really surprised that we would be successful with it. I mean, I have a track record of success in other ventures, not necessarily this one.
Right.
So the tools and skills that I've developed over 35-ish years before I started Order of Man, they all translate. So it wasn't like I didn't think I could create something significant and meaningful. I didn't think it would happen that quickly. I also didn't know how much I was capable of. And I'm just scratching the surface on what I feel like I am now, because that world has been unlocked for me. So it's been pretty amazing to see my own personal growth and development through this. I tell people all the time, I feel like I'm the greatest beneficiary of the work that we're doing. And any post that I make about trying to improve yourself, or that quote that you read earlier, those are reminders for myself just as much as anybody else. I've
Mm.
never considered myself the epitome of masculinity, and the pinnacle of what it means to be a man. And people ask me, well, what makes you qualified to give this advice? Just the fact that I'm on the path myself and I have a desire to help and serve other people. So, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if there's a whole lot of surprises, but the thing I am dealing with right now is bringing the right people into the organization, who are going to help us take this to the next level. And that has always delegation, and that been a challenge for me, but we're working through it.
Yeah, it sounds like, you were obviously surprised at the rate of the growth, and then that presented
Definitely.
some growing pains that you're addressing now, and that might tap into a skill set that you maybe haven't had to access in a while. But that'll be interesting journey to watch. So yeah, so that's a
And not,
perfect
can I
segue.
say one thing
Yeah,
about that too?
for
Because I
sure.
think the language we use is really, really important. So the term you used was growing pains, and I've used that term in the past. I mean, I get it. I understand. I think everybody hearing that understands what you mean when you say that.
Right.
I don't choose to look at it as a pain, because if I look at it that way,
For
then
sure.
what am I hindering myself? Am I putting up a wall that doesn't need to be there? I consider it more growing opportunities, and that might
Yeah.
sound cliche or
Hmm.
fluffy or whatever, but these are all opportunities when I'm presented with challenges in growing the business and movement, that I can get better, that I can develop new skills, that I can bring other people into the organization, that I can hire a coach or a mentor to help walk me through this process I've never been through before. So it's not painful, it's actually enjoyable, and there are opportunities on the other side of these challenges that we're presented
Yeah.
with. I just
No,
want
I
to be
like.
very clear how we talk to ourselves.
Sure, sure. And then we're going to get into that for sure too. But I will, so I'll kind of push back on you and I'll change this a little. Then I would say, being that your theme lately on your podcast is a little bit about discomfort and
Mhm.
understanding to embrace that. So it's just growing discomfort is all that is. If we're going to,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know,
We can sometimes be our own worst enemy by the way that we talk to ourselves and the barriers we place that are non existent or minimal, and we make them bigger than they actually are, or more challenging than they need to be. So we
yep.
just need to be careful of that. That's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's great. Yeah. So speaking of, I'm glad you brought it up. Narrative. So we're talking about conquering our enemy. There's an enemy out there. We all face it, and that would actually allude to the theory that there is a battle going on or opposition if we acknowledge that there's an enemy. So the enemy, narrative, masculinity, elevation. Let's talk a little bit about some of those and how they oppose kind of what we're trying to accomplish. It's a faith-based podcast, so what God says about us. So talk about narrative in your life, and maybe what in your opinion makes a narrative so powerful.
Well, any idea or process or tool or creation or piece of art or whatever you're trying to put out into the world is all formulated in your mind first. So if I went to this seminar years and years ago, and I don't remember much of it except for one phrase that the guy said. He said, "Garbage in, garbage out." So this amazing processor we have called the brain can only compute based on the data that's inputted into the system. You know how you hear people, they're like, "Oh, dang computers," and they get so frustrated with the computer. It's like, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Well, it does exactly what you tell it to do.
Operator error. Yeah.
That's all it is, right? Unless there's some sort of glitch or
Mm-hmm.
technical, issue, but that's few and far between. More often than not, it's operator error. And so when you're computing data, if we're just looking at formulas, or in my previous life when I was a financial advisor, you just input the raw data and then the computations take place. Well, if the raw data that you're putting into your mind is filth, it's garbage, it's pornography, it's drug abuse, it's mental and emotional abuse to yourself, then naturally and inevitably you're going to produce less than desirable results. And the real trick, the real catch on this is you actually believe it. And
Yeah.
that's, whatever you tell yourself, you actually believe. If you paint yourself as the perpetual victim, then you are a victim. You've made yourself a victim. And what ends up happening is sometimes, a lot of the time, it's self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you say, "Well, I'm a victim," then you're going to do things subconsciously even that are going to allow you to be victimized by other people. And so we need to be very, very cautious of the information, the resources, the tools, the programming, the conversations, the environment, the people that we're talking with, the podcasts we're listening to, the type of music even that we're listening to,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that it's not garbage in, garbage out. It's, great fuel so you can produce favorable results on the
Yeah.
back end.
Yeah. And so that, you know, your your journey, and I've listened to you enough to know that you're kind of your upbringing, and there were some things that maybe not storybook or ideal as far as a dad always being around, right? And a single mom at times. And so in your formative years and then into like an early adulthood, I'm imagining you were getting bombarded with some of these what we call false narratives about maybe your potential or what you're called to do, or man, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna be this, or man, I can't be this. Did you have anything like that you can talk about? And then maybe the evolution of how you broke out of some of that.
Yeah, I do have some examples of that, but what I would say is that whatever whatever you perceive about your reality is wrong. Everything. The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, everything about the way that you're perceiving life is wrong. There's so many variables. There's so many factors at play. There's so much that you don't know about a particular situation. You're typically looking at it from one or two angles. You're not looking at it with a 360-degree angle. And so what we do as human beings is we start filling in the gaps, right? Like if you, for example, if I took my hand and I just I stretched it out in front of my face, in front of, let's say this poster over here on the wall. And I just stretched this out. So that's probably what, 2.5 to 3 feet. I stretched out in front of me and I put my hand over the poster. Well, I can still see the poster. Like I can see every element of the poster, even though there's a big hand in the middle of of my eye, my line of sight, and the poster itself. Well, how can that be? Well, because the eyes are formulating connections, right? They're saying, okay, that line is blocked, but it connects probably with this line. And so your eyes and your brain are filling in the blanks. Okay, that's what's actually happening in any other circumstance and situation too. So you see a scenario, you run across a scenario, and you don't have the entire picture, but what you're doing is you're filling in the blanks based on your own personal observation, experience, and vantage point. Well, that's all BS. It's all a lie. So I learned very early on that if we're going to lie about situations and we're going to make things up about the realities that we're dealing with, we might as well make up a narrative that serves us well. And by the way, that's not entirely true either. Like if my mom came to me and said, "Well, you're special, you're going places in life." Is that true? No,
You
not
can do
necessarily.
anything. You
Right.
can do anything. Yeah.
That's not necessarily true. And yet if you accept it and you embrace it and then you start acting on that narrative, then you will make it so. So it's a very interesting thing is that
Mhm.
everything that you know about life and the way you operate in it is a lie. It's BS. It's false. It's made up. So if we know that, let's just make up stuff that's going to serve us well. And I learned
Yeah.
that. And I have a lot of inputs in my early childhood that were negative. You know, I had a stepfather who was an alcoholic, one who was verbally and emotionally abusive. But then I also had my mom, who was very, very influential positively in my life. And I had football coaches, one in particular that I still stay in touch with, who taught me about life on the football field and the baseball diamond. So we can choose, like, do I choose that narrative or do I choose this narrative? And really all you have to do is ask yourself, which one's going to serve me better? Is calling yourself a loser going to serve you, or calling yourself a winner going to serve you? Well, naturally calling yourself a winner. So you might as well go with that one.
Yeah. And I think, I've said it before that, kind of a narrative that we buy into ignites sort of our navigation of this is where we're going to go based on what I'm choosing to buy into. And, we've got to get kind of back to baseline of, look, we're going to be accountable for our choices that we make. So are we really wanting to let other people or other narratives impact who I become to make those choices? Like, I got to be accountable, right? There's going to be consequences to those. So if I don't take charge of who I think I am and what I'm capable of rather than someone else, then I think that impacts our story. And I think that obviously there's some downstream ramifications to that. I mean, are there any, I don't want to, split hairs or fine tooth comb this, just one other point I wanted to ask you about narrative is, in the world we're in with men and what you see every day and the council that you guys have, the brotherhood, you know, are there narratives that stand out to you that are kind of causing this disruption, like causing us that are impeding our progress as men that we're, it's almost like the apple, like it looks good, but we know we shouldn't really be eating that. So anything that stand out to you on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I can talk about that. Actually, one thing I wanted to say before that, because you had mentioned about we need to take ownership of ourselves and be careful of narratives that we're hearing from other individuals and not take that into consideration. I would say actually we probably should take positive narratives from people, whether that's a mentor or a coach or your wife. You know, it's funny, we have this interesting mentality generally, which is this zero F's mentality that you've heard a lot. Like, I don't give a dang what anybody else thinks about me, and I don't care, and I'm going to take on the world. That nihilistic attitude is not serving you. So for me, like, I actually care about what my wife thinks. I care about what my listeners think about the
Mm-hmm.
podcast and how we're running it. I care about what my clients think. I care about what my friends and my mentors and my coaches think. I care about those I'm inspired by, what they think. And so I take their feedback of the way they're interpreting how I'm showing up, and improve myself because of it. So we need to be very careful of
Sure.
not getting into this rut of like, that's just me, and I don't care about anything else. And I don't think you were suggesting that at all, but that
Sure.
is a very common theme that permeates a lot of culture and society today.
Agreed. That's a fair point, and I'm glad you kind of broke that down a little bit. So, moving into our next kind of bullet here, the NME, the masculinity. I mean, we're hitting on some things, but like I said earlier, I wanted to really peel back some of the layers a little more from your perspective because you may or may not know a little bit about this topic. So I figure you're a guy to ask about masculinity. So,
Sure. Yeah. Let's see what we can
you're
do.
you're guys, yeah, give it a shot. So, how would you respond to somebody that says, and I just wrote this down, I wanted to throw this out. So, the shift and disruption of society's view of masculinity is an indictment on us as men, and we only have ourselves to blame.
Not only ourselves, but certainly we're a factor. You know, the way that we show up. So here's one thing I talk about when I do presentations or I talk with young men, and I ask them, I say, you know, do you have a choice whether or not you influence people? Think about that question. Do you have a choice whether or not you influence people? And I get 50-50 mixed response on that. You know, some guys will say, yes, you have a choice if you're going to be influential. And other people who I ask that question to will say, no, you know, you don't have a choice. And that latter answer, you don't have a choice, is accurate.
Right.
The way that you show up is going to influence people positively or negatively. Like, you don't get to absolve yourself of the responsibility or your interaction with the environment that you find yourself in.
Yeah.
If I show up drunk in front of my kids, that's going to influence them. If I show up
Yeah.
fully and present in front of my kids, that's going to influence them as well. So when you ask the question, do we have ourselves to blame? Not fully. I wouldn't say
Sure.
100%. There's some external circumstances we can get into, and I'm sure we will. But to say that we don't have a part to play in how we're perceived would be delusional.
Yeah.
So we need to, as men, do a better job of showing up, of developing skill sets, of working to serve those we're attempting to lead, to become masters of our environment and domain, to help other people where we can, to be honorable. I mean, there's a whole code of conduct that I personally have, and I suggest that other men develop for themselves, that we ought to step into. And when we fall short of that, and we will, all of us, myself included,
Yep.
then we have to know that people are going to look at it and think less favorably of you, and then associate that characteristic or that action and attitude with the broad swath of men in general. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, for example, that men who have physically abused their wives, well, that's just them, that's not me. Well, a woman who has been physically abused by another man should develop the maturity to understand that's an isolated incident. But let's not pretend that the human mind is a powerful thing to keep us safe. So of course she would be hesitant and concerned and scared around other men. And it's our job to ensure that we do what we can so that the people around us feel uplifted and edified, not scared and terrified.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, and so what I, hear you talk about and touch on just a little bit is, man, in order to really kind of right this ship, if you will, and become more pilots than passengers again, we got to know how we got here to be able to fix the situation, right? So, man, in your opinion, what are some of the ways that how did we get here, and then what are the ways that we, like I said, get our hands back on the wheel of this?
Yeah. Let's hit on one other thing before we get to that point, which is the
Yeah.
difference between fault and responsibility. So I don't know if you used the term fault in that previous question, but I think a lot of people do. This is men's fault, right? Not, not, I think you said, are we to blame is what you
Blame,
said.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Which
Same
ties in
thing.
with fault, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So there might be some blaming. There might be some fault that we need to accept, but there's a difference between fault and responsibility. And so if you care about something, uh, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter who's to blame. What matters is that if you care about it, that you take responsibility for it,
Yeah.
which might mean that you need to bring in other people. Let's take a work environment. Let's say you, as the leader of a small team at work, are tasked by your higher levels to complete this assignment in 2 weeks. And so you bring 3 or 4 other people on, you give them their assignments, you tell them what you want to do, and then you fall short as a team of the stated objective, the goal of getting this by deadline. Well, you might be tempted to say, hey, that's John's fault. John didn't give me what I needed on time. John didn't do the correct research. John did this. John didn't do that, whatever, right? That's blaming somebody else. Well,
Hmm.
okay, if I care about it, I need to take responsibility. So the better approach would be, hey, John, we're 3 or 4 days into this thing. I haven't gotten any feedback from you. I need to know what's going on so that we can ensure that we're on track. That's taking responsibility. Or if it's not working out, say, John, we brought you into the team. You're not upholding your end of the deal. So we're going to let you go. And I'm going to bring somebody else in here who can do it. And that's responsibility. So the blame is not so much of an issue as much as it is, are you willing to take responsibility of what's going on around you? And if you care about it, you should do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if enough guys do that, then ripple effects happen, and then we start to see a societal migration back to what we kind of, like you said earlier, we're not needing to redefine it. We just need to get it back into its rightful standing, and exhibit it more, get it out there, and maybe expose the right way that masculinity is supposed to look. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. I mean, you're talking to next generations too. Like I hear you've got, there's some younger guys on that send in questions to your podcast, and I know that you and your oldest son are embarking on, starting a more to the next generation type message, which I think is
Right.
great. And I want you to go into that a little later too, but you know, what do you say to your oldest? Let's use him as an example. I've got 3 boys. What are you saying to him as to why, like, we're having to reclaim this? Why are we in trouble with this? Why is this a huge issue? I mean, how do you say that to the next generation? How do you tell him?
So my oldest son and I, well, all my kids, but my oldest son and I, in this instance, we have a lot of conversations about this based on real world experiences. So if we see somebody showing up who maybe isn't showing up the way they should be, we have a conversation about that. Hey, what do you think about that person's behavior? How do you think that went? Do you think that's how it should be done? What do you think? What would you do differently? How would you handle this situation? And so there's a lot of these coaching moments in real time. Otherwise, it's hard to. This is a weird analogy. I'm even hesitant to say it. Let's say your dog, pees on the carpet of your house. All right. And you're ticked off, you're pissed off, but you don't do anything about it. You don't scold it, or you don't like walk it outside and have it pee out there. But 48 hours later you come back and you just beat the hell out of your dog. Is your dog going to learn anything about not peeing on the carpet anymore? No, it's
Right.
going to be scared of you. It's going to be upset. Like it doesn't know what in the world you're upset by. And every time it sees you, it's going to associate that with pain. That's a weird analogy, but I think you can
Yeah. It
understand the
actually
concept.
creates another problem. I mean, you're
Right.
counterproductive. Yeah.
Exactly. So with our children, I think a lot of the times we do the same thing. We see behavior from them, or we see behavior from other people, or opportunities for coaching and learning and teaching, and we just ignore it because it's inconvenient or it's uncomfortable. My son asked me a question. This was 6 7 months ago about uh, some sexual acts. We'll just say it like that. And he asked me, and it was a very uncomfortable question that he asked me. And it would be very easy for me to say, oh, go ask your mom, or I don't want to talk about it right now, or whatever, any number of things that we do. Instead, I took a deep breath and we talked through it right then and there, because I was glad he asked me. I'd rather him ask me than ask his buddies who don't know anything else either,
100%.
or just learn it online, or whatever he
Yeah.
could get into. So to answer your question, when we see behavior that I don't agree with or I don't think is helpful, then my children and I talk about it. If they're engaged in that behavior, we talk about why we don't do that, why it's important, what are alternatives, how can you correct the behavior. If we see it in other people, we talk about the same thing. But ultimately, I think a lot of what happened with masculinity, there's a lot to this, but one of the biggest issues is this introduction of feminism. And feminism originally, I think, was really helpful in that we want to make sure that we're honoring women, that they have equal
Hmm.
rights, and that they're at the same level as men. Totally understandable. And then we get into the differences between equality and equity, right? So equality is
Yep.
basically equal rights and opportunities under the law or under a moral code. And then you
Hmm.
have equity, which is equal outcome. And so what the feminist movement began to do is began to perpetuate the lie that women needed to have equity with men in order to be equal, in order to be
Hmm.
valuable, in order to be worthy. And so they sent the women out into the workforce and they said, if you want to be just as good as a man, you need to act like a man. So they sent them out into the workforce, and they told them that we're going to have you being at home, taking care of your house, being a homemaker. Even that has a negative connotation to it anymore. Is not the right thing to do, and it means that your husband is uh, keeping you down. It's like all these little
Oh yeah.
lies that
Oh
that
yeah.
have been perpetuated over 40, 50, 60 years. And then now, because so many people have bought into this, entire generations, they look at men and think, well, yeah, it was men who were keeping us down the entire time. And the patriarchal, society that we live in, and how tyrannical it is, and how we need to be out into the workforce in larger numbers. And then this idea of the gender pay gap. And I mean, there's just so much to it. There's so much to it. But here, those are a couple of issues that are happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, obviously our kids, it's going to be dependent on age and maturity and how much detail we go into and what they really can conceive and really comprehend of this
Mhm.
whole part, but I think it's important to get them because we shy away. I think as dads, I think sometimes we think, he's not ready for that, or I don't, it's a little uncomfortable, or not sure, real sure how to explain it. And I think the important part, like you said, is in that moment, just try to explain it. Just talk to them like people, right? And I think I don't know if we're doing that enough. I know that I have some very uncomfortable conversations, whether they want to hear it or not, whenever I see an opportunity. And I'm like, look, you're going to need to know this later. Like, why would I
Exactly.
not tell you this now? So you can avoid some of the pitfalls, right? So you can get out in front of some of this thing. Cause I think too many times we're making decisions in the moment when we are faced with the situation instead of, you know, outlining that in our mind, like orchestrate, what would I do here? Like I tell my
Mhm.
kids all the time, play that thing out 2 hours, 2 days from now and see if that's really what you want to do. So I don't know why I got off on that tangent, but do you have anything to add along those lines at all?
Yeah, I don't one of the things you said is that we don't know if they're ready or not to have that conversation. I don't think that's the case. I believe that we tell ourselves that as a
Yeah.
shield for what's really going on, which is salvaging ourselves, our own feelings, our own time, our own energy. And so not having these conversations with our children or employees or whoever else, you might need to have a wife that you have to have a difficult conversation with, isn't really to salvage or to spare them. It's to
For
spare
sure.
your
Yeah.
own feelings and your own discomfort.
Yeah.
And then we make up little lies that justify how we can spare ourselves from the pain or discomfort we're about to embark on.
Exactly. And I want to also kind of just reference a podcast episode that you did a while back and just have you expand on it a little bit in regards to being better men, like being better dads, those kinds of things. But you did an episode called 1 Degree Difference, and it talks about clearly making small adjustments. And then you also did
Mhm.
one about singles versus home runs, but I want to talk about
Mhm.
the 1 degree difference. You mentioned, because in the world of laying flooring, which I've never done, and I respect the people that do that, but I just know enough to know that if you get off 1/32 when you start this job, right, when
Yeah.
you're 50 feet across the living room, that's going to be maybe a foot. We never
Right.
know. So like
Right.
little degrees matter and make up something at the other side, make up a big impact. Talk a little bit about some of the little adjustments, just little things. I know there's countless of them, but maybe one or two. And you're going to push back on me because I hear you and I know how you think. And you're like, I hate it when people ask me to name one thing. Like, tell me one thing that matters most in life. No, but I'm just saying, throw out a couple things that you think maybe your guys are overlooking. Just a little thing that you can change to be a better guy, to be a better dad and husband.
Yeah, I think most people know the answer to that question, right? It's like working out, eating correctly, having conversations with your wife, developing skill sets. Like everybody knows those answers, and they're not wrong, but they're just common. The one thing I would say that men need to do more than they are right now is, well, there's actually two things, but they're tied together. Number one, plan out every single day. Don't just get up and go balls of the wall on whatever you're doing. Like you're going to get stuff done that way, but you're never going to know if it's efficient. You're never going to know if it's effective. You're never going to be as efficient or effective as you could be if you would just take 10 minutes per day and map out your day. What do I need to get done? What's the most important thing? What conversations need to take place? Who do I need to be calling? What's on my calendar? Just taking 10 minutes and just outlining your day. You would never go into battle without a strategy. And yet we go into every single day really not thinking about how we're going to maximize it. And here's what ends up happening: we actually get engaged in somebody else's plan,
Mm,
right? If we don't plan out our own day, we're actually going off of somebody else's plan. So
mm-hmm,
our boss has a plan for us, our clients have a plan for us, our wives have a plan for us. And sometimes they're in alignment and other times they're not. And if you don't have a plan in place of your own, you can't actually see when they're in alignment or not. So that's number
mm-hmm,
one. Number two, very similar, you need to cap out every day as well. So you go back and you look at what's been done. You look at what hasn't been done and that you need to roll over for tomorrow. You ask yourself where you were efficient and effective. You ask yourself where you fell short. And ultimately, you ask, what do I need to do tomorrow to be that 1% better than I was today?
yeah.
These are little things that it's going to take you 20 minutes a day, 10 in the morning, 10 at night, done, and it will drastically improve your results over time.
Yeah, bookend it. Yeah, I'm hearing you talk about the offense versus defense too, with football season coming up, like intentionality versus reactionary. I think what you're saying is, Dave Ramsey talks about tell your money what to do for you rather than vice versa by doing a budget,
Right.
right? So in here, you're telling your day what to do. Like you're in charge of that. So is there adjustments? Is there adaptability involved in that? Yes, there's things that come up. You got to pivot in the day. But like you're saying, offense versus defense, we put it down on paper. I think we're more likely to believe it and buy into it. And then we check it off at the end. Like you're saying, accountability, if only there was a resource that maybe guys could write down into and outline the day. Talk about the impact of that in your group of guys.
That's a good segue there. Well done on that. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't care if you use what programs and tools and planners we have available or you use your own, but the key is this, that you have to have a system. I call it this. You have to have a framework and you have to have a network. Those are the two things you need. So the framework is the system. It's the tools, it's the strategy, it's the processes that you go through. The framework I use for what I was talking with you about is our battle planner, right? So I can go through every morning, write out everything I need to. It's all documented right here. I can cap at the end of the day. So that's the framework. But then you have to have a network, and the network is people around you who are holding you accountable and people that you're holding accountable to accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. So a framework might be a local band of brothers. It might be a men's group at church. It might be a small team or a contingency at work. In our case, it's the Iron Council, which is our exclusive brotherhood. So there's a lot of different ways to create these frameworks and networks, and it doesn't matter which one you use as long as it works and as long as you have those two elements at play. I was going to think something too about your comment about offense and defense. So I think all of us understand what offense is, right? We have our plays, we run our plays, and then it works or it doesn't. But defense is also really important too. And this is something a lot of people overlook. The way that I view defense is the boundaries that you establish. So let's say you're on the offense and you've documented everything that you want. You've written it all down for the day and you have all these plans in place and you know the priority of the way you want to get things done. So here's where defense comes in. When people try to run their own plays and it's at odds with your playbook, right? So you need to establish boundaries.
That's good.
And put the boundaries in place, because look, here's a small example. So I podcast here. This is my office here at our home. So my wife is downstairs. I hear my 4 kids running around upstairs and downstairs. They're doing their thing in school and everything else. Well, if I just let everything just kind of run rampant, I would never have a quiet space to do a podcast like this. My kids would be coming in and they'd be banging on the door and wanting to wrestle, and the dogs would be in here, and it would just be chaos instead of something that's actually productive. So I've talked to my kids. I said, if my door is closed, which it is right now, if you need something from me, you can knock lightly. If I don't answer, it means I'm in the middle of something and I can't come see you or engage in whatever. If I answer and say, come on in, feel free to come on in. Even before a podcast, I tell them, hey, I'm going to be on a podcast. I will be in that room for an hour. Please don't bother me unless it's something urgent or there's an emergency. But that's the boundary, a healthy boundary that I have established. I've communicated it with them, and then I uphold the boundaries. That's the defense that you need to employ in your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And setting those on the front end too. I think sometimes as guys, Definitely. we get too much caught off guard and on our heels a little bit with some of this, and then try to establish boundaries in the middle of the play. Right. And establish a new defensive plan in the middle of the play. And so I think it's important to have that laid out ahead of time. That's awesome.
Or, the other thing that we'll do is we'll create these boundaries in our mind. Like I'll close the door and that'll be the boundary I've created in my mind. And then I don't communicate it with my kids. And so that the kids come in, and because they didn't know, and then I blow up at them. Well, how come you're here? I'm trying to be on a podcast. Why are you bothering me? Okay, well, what right do I have to expect them to honor the boundary I've established if I haven't communicated the boundary with them? Let's go back to that football analogy. If you're playing the game and there's no sideline or markers for the end zone, like how do you know where you're supposed to operate? Well, you don't. So what do? We put the sidelines on, we put the ends and we put the first down markers, and everybody knows like those are the boundaries. They've been communicated. And so there's no guesswork about where out of bounds is.
Absolutely. Level playing field. I love it, man. Let's transition then and put a bow on some of this, as we go with NME and we're on elevation now. And so, I think there's 2 ways to talk about this, and we can just trash it all and just tell me what you think about it. And I can mute and you can just talk for the next 10 or 15 minutes. But I do want to ask you, so elevation on a stage you're on in this light that you've kind of cast not on yourself, but your work has enabled people to really, you're exposed, your vision visible. Is elevation a challenge? Like, how do you stay grounded? And talk about the traps of pride for guys, and maybe where does that trip us up? And is it a factor even to you?
Yeah, I mean, well, definitely it's a factor. It's something I deal with pride and ego because I have had some moderate success. And, there are people who have acknowledged what we've been able to create here. And occasionally I'll get recognized. I was in a store the other day and somebody came up to me and he said, "Hey, man, I just wanted to let you know I really appreciate and admire what you're doing and enjoy your podcast." And I didn't know the guy. But so it was very cool to have that experience, but it can also boost the pride and the ego, right? Which then becomes a problem down the road because you think that you're better than you really are. So look, there's nothing wrong with elevating yourself. That's one thing
Right.
that I notice. I know this is a faith-based podcast, and so that's one thing a lot of Christians get tied up with is they think, well, if I'm trying to improve and get better, then that's at direct odds with ego and commandments and things like this. It
No.
isn't. Do you think
Mm-mm.
do you think you're here to have this experience to not improve your station in life,
Yeah.
to not serve people, to not develop new skills, to not become a master or masterful at something? No, of course not. You're supposed to elevate yourself. But the best thing that I've done to keep myself grounded is to constantly remind myself and then also uh, work towards learning new information.
Mm.
Because if I ever get to the point where, man, I'm the greatest podcaster ever, okay, then you're going to stop learning. You're going to halt your progress and your growth. If instead I look at other people and I say, well, look here, here's what John's doing, and that was pretty cool. Maybe I can implement something like that. And here's what Joe's doing. Here's what Steve's doing. And I'm constantly learning. And I have that mindset of what can I learn today? It's very hard to be open-minded enough to learn things and simultaneously be arrogant and prideful. They just
Yeah.
don't go hand in hand. So you can drown out that pride by being a constant student, asking great questions, listening and learning, keeping your mouth shut at certain times when it's appropriate so you can just absorb. That's one that I have a problem with because I love to talk,
Mm.
but that is something I need to do, and I acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I hear you talking. As you're talking, I'm thinking false humility, and I think that people, humility is not necessarily about thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less often, is really
Mm.
what that definition is. And so it's not about. So the false humility is the guy that's like, oh, I can't really, even give myself a compliment in the moment. Really, I can't do that. That's pride. No, or I can't improve myself because then I stand out, and then I'm better than this group of people. Well, no, that's not it. Like we're making ourselves better, and you hit it on the head. Coachability is it. Like coachability, how coachable are you? And then that's when, if we're not coachable, then that's when the lines get blurred with arrogance and pride and those kinds of things. But yeah, if you're coachable and you're learning, man, and you're reaching out to people going, hey, you know more than I do on this. You're doing really well. How do I get good at this? Like there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think we're called. I think God wants us to be out there doing that and being kind of out front and like, this is, we're doing this for his glory, of course, but to make others better. And I think if we lose sight of making others better and doing it for something bigger than us, then it gets slippery. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the motive has to be the improvement of other people. I really do. Even things that we would consider selfish pursuits, which isn't always bad, by the way. Jujitsu is a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And so I go 4 times a week and I go by myself and I'm usually gone for a couple of hours. And it would be very easy for me to say, I should be at home. I shouldn't be doing this. This is for myself. And yes, it is for myself, but also I'm actually working to improve my physicality, to improve my mindset so that when I come back to my family and my friends and clients and
Yeah.
people who would be led by me, then I'm more capable of doing that. So make sure the motive is pure. Is it to lift yourself up on the pedestal or is it to help others on the pedestal themselves? And I think
Yeah.
if you're really focused on that, then you're going to be able to pursue all kinds of things that you wouldn't have pursued before because maybe you were worried about outpacing somebody or how they might feel if you excelled in some arena. And that's just that's just
Yeah.
not a healthy way to live.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So while we're on that topic, so we kind of transitioned from, that pride factor and that component of, humility and pride and arrogance. So to lifting others up. And you mentioned that, your work, the work you do is clearly built around that. Your vision, and I'm not speaking for you, but I'm assuming your vision was born from the desire to help people get better at something, in specifically masculinity. So talk about how fulfilling that, because I think guys out there, I think it's lost on us sometimes how really we end up benefiting from that almost more than the people we're elevating, And so
Yeah,
talk about how
definitely.
fulfilling, and maybe even, shoot, to use the word calling. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but like, how fulfilled is that to know that you've got these guys out there and they're doing it, man. They're taking it to the streets, and they're, iron sharpening iron. And that's, a big part of what you're, empowering them to do.
Yeah, I use the word calling. I do feel like that now. I don't think that I felt that way when I started it because I didn't know where it was going and I didn't realize how impactful it could actually be in other people's lives. But now that I see how impactful it is and how other people are doing amazing things that they didn't even think themselves capable of a year or two ago,
Mm-hmm.
because in part they're listening to this podcast, man, that's a lot of responsibility. That's a lot of weight. And so there's a lot of course, fulfillment that comes with that. So yeah, I do feel really called to do it. The calling thing is interesting though, because what a lot of men believe in my experience is that their calling is just this like mystical force out there
Yeah.
somewhere. And once they find it, then the heavens will part and the angels will sing and everything will be great from
If
then
they
on
even
out.
find it. Yeah. If they do.
Right. Right. And so because they're waiting or searching for this quote unquote calling, they end up they end up in a very, very difficult spot mentally and emotionally and maybe even spiritually. Like, why isn't God listening to me? Right. Or why isn't he helping me? So they set themselves up for failure. So what I would say, instead of like worrying about what your one calling
Mm.
is to build something, to develop something, to pursue something. And so if you're listening to this and you've thought to yourself, and John, maybe you can attest to this as well, hey, I'd really like to start a podcast, then do it. Period. Full stop. Like, don't think about how am I going to make money? Is this what I'm supposed to do? Am I meant to do this? Is this going to be my calling? No, if you feel compelled to start a podcast, then take the first step. And the first step is literally buying $100 microphone, using the computer I'm sure you already have, and paying $15 to host some audio on one of these podcast platforms. That's it. And
Yeah.
you do 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 episodes, and you're going to find out, hey, I really like this. I'm going to take the next step. I'm going to invest in a different microphone. I'm going to work on my skills as a conversationalist. I'm going to work on networking so I can get higher caliber guests on my podcast. Or alternatively, you might think to yourself, I, I I actually don't like that, but I did make a connection with this guy who said he has an opportunity, and I really like what he had to say, and I'd like to explore that. So I'm going to call up this individual and see what he has to say, and maybe we can do something together. And you never know where it's going to take you, but what ends up happening through your just small little seemingly insignificant actions, you begin to, instead of find your calling, develop it and build it. And then you look back 6 years down the road and you think, holy cow, I feel called to do this. Well, maybe, but also you built it over that time. There's so much more value in that than looking endlessly for some sort of sign that you're on the right path.
Yeah, yeah, and I will attest to it, and I will say, it has to. I think it aligns and maybe even begins with what you're passionate about and why you're passionate about it. And I think your gifts and your passions kind of align whenever you're talking about when you take that step out, like that could potentially be what you were meant to do, but that's not where you start, right? You start with, man, what am I good at? Like, what do I feel like the need is, and how do I align what I'm good at to maybe do something that fulfills that need? Like in this situation, COVID happened, right? I wrote a book that I've been dreaming about writing for 3 years, and I was lazy and made excuses. I'll be honest. And then this podcast, I've never done it. I was scared to death. I'm like, podcast, no way. But I'm like, let's get another voice of encouragement out there. Let's tell some stories that people are going to build off of and be equipped to maybe be better down the road. And then there I go and I start doing it. And I mean, I feel like I'm right in the swim lane that maybe it's not a calling, but I think it's something fulfilling and it's doing somebody else some good. So, man, and so to go back to your journey and how
Can I
quickly
say, John, before we
yeah,
move on
yeah,
from
yeah,
that, I do want to say one other thing on that. So
yeah,
you said what you're passionate about and what you're good at. The way that I look at it is you should explore what you're interested in. Like don't worry about, am I passionate about this? And don't worry about, am I skilled? Am I good at this? You should be looking at things that you're interested in. If you're remotely interested in, then take one step, then another step, then another step. Because the things that you're interested in, you will become passionate about, and you
right,
will develop and improve your skill set and become good at. So I
right,
think the best
yeah,
qualifier for which avenue to take is, does this sound of interest to me? Maybe that's trying jujitsu. Maybe it's dabbling in hunting. Maybe it's starting a podcast, or getting into art, or maybe you want to work on trucks, or I don't know,
yeah,
whatever sounds interesting to you, you owe it to yourself to take the first step. And through that, you're going to develop passion. You're going to get better at it and improve your skill set. And so I think that's probably the best
yeah.
indicator to look at.
That's real good. Yeah. And thanks for clarifying that. And I always say, like, just because I like driving fast on the interstate doesn't mean I should go be a NASCAR driver. Right. Just
Right.
because I'm passionate. So that doesn't necessarily always
Unless
equate
you're
to what I
interested in
like
that.
doing. Yeah, that's true.
And then what you do, if you want to be, so here's the first thing you do. If you're like, yeah, I want to drive NASCAR. Okay, well then you need to go to the racetrack and you need to rent a car, one of these exotic cars, and you need to race it around the racetrack. And it's going
Yeah.
to cost you a couple $100 for the afternoon. And you can see. And worst case scenario, you had a cool experience for the afternoon. Best case
Yeah.
scenario, you're like, I actually really like this. And then you go on to the next step, which is probably some training from somebody else who knows how to drive really well. And you get that person to train you. So yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Of course. So my audience, I hear you telling them all to go be NASCAR drivers. No.
100%. And if you don't,
So
you're a loser and not a man.
you're
So
missing out. Right. Well, all right. So, man, we talked about faith a little bit. So, I wanted to just find out from you, because I know you're a Christian. I know you're grounded in those morals and principles and values. And man, so have you noticed any sort of, I don't know, growth from a faith standpoint, or has your spiritual self learned anything along the way? Or learn's a bad word, but have you developed that at all? And do you feel like it's been stronger or tested, or have you grown in any way in that regard?
I don't know if it's been tested. I mean, there's always things that are going to test our faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Daily, you're going to be tested in that way. And I just don't think it's come specifically from this. But
Mm-hmm.
what I have felt is, because of the calling conversation that we're having earlier, I do feel called and compelled to do this work, which keeps me in it. And I'm grateful for that,
Yeah.
because there are days that are challenging. There are days that are hard. There's minor setbacks that we have. There's obstacles and challenges that we need to overcome. There's those growing pains, like we were talking about earlier, right? There's all of that stuff. And without having a sense of faith that the work that I'm doing is well beyond my comprehension and even my skill set, I feel like I need help doing it, and I feel like I will receive that help, because this isn't about me. Now, I'm served in doing this. Let's
Sure.
not
For sure.
mince words on that. There's a lot of value. This is a career. I've made a business out of it. My family and I create experiences, and we live a nice life. So there's benefit to me, but this is something that goes well beyond me, and I have faith that I will receive the tools, the mindset, the opportunities that I'll need to continue this work. And so
Yeah.
I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So as we close up shop, man, because of how popular it is and how meaningful the work is, I want you to maybe, just to close us out, talk about, obviously where they can find you and the resources that are available and where they can get them, but then also give us a little bit of man in the makings sneak peek, maybe in a time frame, if there is one, with you and your son.
Yeah. Yeah. So Man in the Making is going to be our next podcast in the Order of Man empire that we're working to create. But my oldest son, has always been very, very interested in this work and what we're doing. And, we look for resources. People ask us about resources for young men all the time, from what books should young men read, to how do I have this particular conversation about the birds and the bees with my son, all this kind of stuff. Or
Yeah.
even young men, 16, 17, 18-year-old young men who will reach out and say, hey, I'm still in high school and this is what's going on. And I don't know what I want to do afterwards. Or, my
Mm-hmm.
dad's not in the picture and I don't really feel very manly. What can I do? These are the kind of things I get from young men.
Mm-hmm.
So my son and I have been talking for years now at this point about him starting his own podcast. So it's called Man in the Making. He paid for the website. He's invested in all the equipment himself because he works in the store, so he makes money. And it's going to be, initially it'll be conversations, father-son type conversations between him and I.
Yeah.
And then what he's going to move into from there is doing short form interviews with some of the men in my network. And when I say some of the men, I'm talking about incredible men like Jocko Willink and
Mm-hmm.
Andy Frisilla and John Eldridge and Stephen Mansfield, incredible men that I'm fortunate enough to have friendships with at this point. And he's going to interview them. What did you learn as a boy to become a man? What do you wish you would have learned? What do I need to learn? And I think he'll have a great time doing that. So that'll be in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Cool.
On that. But if you want to find more about what we're doing or what Man in the Making will be doing when that comes available, listen to our podcast. Since you're listening to podcast right now, Order of Man, wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can head to orderofman.com. That's our headquarters. And then all my social media handles are all at Ryan Michler. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Getter, I think is the new one. All the places you can find us. Just type in Ryan Michler.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's good. And I can attest, and I've shared it probably at, to a level that my network is like, yeah, no, we get it. We know where to find him. I mean, geez. Yeah. So no, I have shared it. And I was talking to my sons. Yeah, man, it's so good. But I was telling my sons, hey, you're not going to believe who I got to come on the show. And they're like, who? And I told them, they're like, the guy with the beard. And so they're like, I send it to my sons, right? I've got a 15, a 20, and a 22-year-old. I send these links and these episodes, and they're like, that guy? I said, yeah. And they're like, oh, don't screw it up, Dad. And I was like,
that's funny. That's still such a weird thing. When you say that, I'm like, it's not. And even if people, stop me at the store like that gentleman did the other day, and I'm like, it's weird. Like I accept it. I accept those compliments because what right do I have to decline somebody else's gift when they pay me a compliment? And I think it is. Like if somebody said, hey, thank you, I listened to your podcast. What right do I have to say, oh, no, it's not. No, I should accept it. Hey, you're welcome. I'm glad you enjoy it. But still, it's so weird. It's still just a weird thing for me. So I appreciate the vote of confidence, man.
Awesome.
I really do.
It's awesome. Well, hey, man, I'm going to let you go. But so audience, hey, thanks for listening and thanks for watching it again, because I have an idea that you're going to need to hear some of this stuff again. So in advance, I look forward to hearing your feedback from this episode. And so until next time, he's been Ryan Michler. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.